Shalom, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee and Connection. Oh my gosh, it was quite a week. Baruch Hashem. All week I was thinking, I have something I want to share. I want to connect with all of you. And the week just ran by. Every day was so crazy and busy. But I was thinking about all of you all week, and I'm excited to share with you some of the thoughts that I had that were made all the more relevant as I did connect with some women over the week. And I want to just start out by saying that when I was writing the email for today's Coffee and Connection, right, to invite you all, I had this realization as I was putting in the subject line when I wanted to put in, are we still here? And it reminded me of that line in the Haggadah where we say that, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. God took us out of Egypt. And if he hadn't taken us out, we would still be there today. And that is a very important comment, a very important point that we make on so many levels. There's like the practical level that no slaves ever got out of Mitzrayim. Like once you're in Mitzrayim, like any other peoples that were enslaved in Mitzrayim, they stayed there. They couldn't, it was like almost impossible to leave Egypt. But even more, what it brought home, not even more, what it brought home to me today was that reality that the only reason we got out of Egypt, the only reason we're not still there today is because something happened, right? Because God did something. And we know that we as a people had to do something in in um what's the word, in response, right? That's the korban pesach, that we were showing that we are together with God in this process, because if nothing had happened, then nothing would happen. And that's a very important thing that we always need to remember, that when nothing changes, nothing changes. The only reason we're out of Egypt is because there was an event, there was a process, let's say even more, that culminated in us leaving Egypt. And that always reminds us that when we're feeling stuck in something and we feel like, why am I still here? Why am I still dealing with this? Why is this still hurting? Why am I still struggling? We can always look at, okay, so then what can I do? Because by doing nothing or by just hoping that something will change, it doesn't change until we do something to create that change. And as I was preparing for Pesach, I listened to a shir, I listened to a class that Rabbi Menachem Liebtag gave on the Haggadah, I think a few years ago. He's one of my favorite rabbis to listen to before Pesach. I've learned so much amazing Torahs from him. He has to write a Haggadah. I mean, all his stuff on Pesach is just amazing. And he was talking about this idea of why Jews learn history. Why do we even have a whole night that the whole idea is to sit down around this table and teach our children our history? Make sure that we as a people, we as ourselves, and we impart to our children about our history. Why is history so important? And he explained that in Mitzrayim itself, and as we put ourselves back there, when we learn history, the idea is that the Jewish people were not just like witnessing the 10 plagues. It wasn't just like a process that they witnessed, it's a process that's supposed to create transformation. He had a cute line that I've been racking my brain for 2 weeks to try to remember, and I can't remember it. But it was like not just something we see, but something that transforms us. And there's this idea that as we learn from our history, that process is allows us to grow from it. We don't just, and this is something that we're meant to do, that's right, the psukim, the verses that we quote in the Haggadah, is comes from a declaration that is from the Torah, where Hashem says, every year you'll bring your first fruits to Jerusalem and you'll make this declaration that reviews your history all the way up until this present day moment. And there's something about reviewing and reminding ourselves of our history that is meant to create a transformation within us, right? Because it's meant to help us recognize where we were, where we're going, right? And not only that, but to remind us to continue to be a part of that process. And I already thought that that was such a beautiful message to take here for Coffee and Connection, because as one of the things that I hear so much from women, and the truth is, I heard it so much from women over Pesach, is I'm stuck in a pattern. This keeps happening every Pesach or every Yantif or every week or every day. I'm stuck in this pattern that I have with my husband, or I've been in this for so long. Is it even possible to get out of it? It just feels like this is just the way things are. And my message is always in that moment, our history does not define our future, right? Our past does not have to define our future. Actually, our past can be an indication of how we can move forward. Rather than saying we've been having this fight for so long, we're going to continue to have it, or we've been struggling like this for so long, we're doomed to continue struggling. What we can do instead is look at, wait, let's use our history to help us change the future, right? Let's look at, and this is one of my favorite things to do because it's practically how we can shift things. You look at a pattern, you understand, where is it that you're stuck? What is it that keeps happening? Let's say you have a fight every Erev Shabbos or every Erev Pesach. There's X, Y, and Z strife, and you want to change that. So you look at, what is it exactly that happens? What is the pattern? And you go back and forward as many steps as possible till you have a really good indication of what's happening, not just then, but probably you'll see, wow, this actually happens every week or every day or every month or every time we have a big stress. And then you get to look for, where is my peace in this pattern? Where do I hold control? Where can I shift things to create something different? And I know we've talked about patterns before, and it's such an important point. But I really wanted to specifically focus in on is not to get stuck in that thought that our history defines our future, but that instead our history has the power to transform our future, right? And we see this all over in Jewish history, right? That we learn from our past to move forward. That's the message of Hazinu, where Hashem tells us, learn your history, because you're going to see over and over again that you're going to mess up, and then you're going to have terrible things happen. But remember that those things are only happening as a wake up call, as a reminder that you've gone off the path, that you've left God. God never leaves you. Right? Hashem is always there for us. Even when it doesn't feel like it, he's there. He's trying to wake us up, because he never leaves us. It's that we leave him. So we find that in Hazinu. We find it in the books of Nevi'im. I mean, look at Shoftim. That's what it's all about, this cycle, right? The book of Judges. I don't want to turn this into a whole sheer, but what we see so beautifully and expressed so much in the Haggadah is this idea that we use our history to move forward in our lives and to give us evidence that we can move forward. When we look back at our history, we so often only see what it is that we're focused on right now, right? Dr. Gottman actually has done studies that, based on how a couple is feeling in their marriage, when you ask them stories about their early relationship, the story, how they tell the story, will change based on how they feel about their spouse or about their relationship in that moment. So when they're not doing well, they'll remember that story negatively. And when they're doing well, they'll remember the same story with fondness and admiration, maybe some comedy, the same things that were making them crazy before, right? And when we look back at our history and we not only have to see the negative, we can also look for evidence of positive things to come. We can look for evidence that things can change because things have not always been like this or they're not always like that, right? We always want to get careful when we're saying always or never. So we can use history in so many ways to help us not feel so stuck, but to help us be able to move forward and to remind ourselves that there's always room, there's always a possibility of growth, especially when we look at our history and analyze it and say, what happens and what can I do differently in the future, knowing what happened and seeing my not just where we struggled, but seeing where we persevered, where we did well, celebrating our victories, all of that gives us the power to move forward. So I'm really going to invite you right now to ask yourself, what is a pattern that you saw come up over Pesach, getting ready for Pesach, Yantif, the Seder, Chalamoid, getting cleaned up from Pesach, working so hard, having the kids home all the time, having the grandkids over, dealing with so much. What is a pattern that you felt like, oh, here we are again, here we go again, that you would really like to break? And see if you can sketch out in as many details as possible, specifically and then perhaps more generally, what it is that happens, right? Well, I'll get upset, I'll get overworked and then he'll say something and that'll bother me. Well, how do I get overworked? And what happens after I get bothered by what he says? Or gets stressed and then I get upset with him that he's stressed and then I criticize him and then he shuts down and then the kids get up. Like, what's the pattern? And see if you can figure that out and then see where you can find your piece as early on as possible in the pattern where you can take responsibility to shift it, where you can not shoulder the blame, but you can see that you have the power to move forward, right? To change it and allow it to be different. And if you feel like, I don't know how I can do that, use your history to inspire you. Remember times that you've moved forward from hardship. Remember opportunities where you were able to do those things that right now you feel like you can't do, right? Um, there's this beautiful story that I read every year in one of the Haggadahs that I like to use. I mean, it's a horror. It's very sad and also very beautiful story that a rabbi told at his grandson's bris in Jerusalem. And the story goes that he was in Bergen-Belsen with his mother, and after a long day of work, it was Pesach, and he went to his mother's barrack to sit with her. And at that point, most of his family was already gone, and he sat with his mother, and he didn't have matzah, and he didn't have maror, and he obviously didn't have a korban pesach, and he was just all he had was the Haggadah that he remembered. And he was reading the Haggadah, he was telling her over the Haggadah, and he got to the point where there's a bracha that says, um, that Hashem redeems us and will continue to take care of us. And he said that in that moment, he just could not continue. He saw so little hope. He felt so little that that was actually a possibility that he couldn't go on. And he said, and this is where, even when I'm reading the story, I start crying. He said, if I had known then that today I would be here in Yerushalayim as the sun deck in my grandson's bris, if I knew that I would have been able to move here with some of my siblings and build a family of children and grandchildren and be living here in this moment, then I could have continued. Right. And sometimes in our hardest moments, it's hard for us to envision that there's the potential for things to move forward. And I think that's what creates the most sadness in our lives, is feeling that we're stuck, feeling like we can't get anywhere. And one of the messages that we get in the Haggadah that takes us through our history is that B'chol dor vador omdim aleinu, every generation there's hardships, every generation there's difficult things. But we have to remember that ever since the beginning of our history, ever since Abraham, Hashem has saved us. Hashem is there to take care of us. And that remains true in every generation, and not just as a nation, but for ourselves individually, that we always have the potential to move things forward. We can always get out of what's feeling so heavy on us. So, that was one of the biggest messages that were in my head, that was really in my head from Erev Pesach on. And it really was brought home to me as women reached out to me over Pesach, sharing their struggles. And I had multiple women reach out saying, how hard Erev Pesach was, and the challenges that came up over Erev Pesach, dealing with their husbands and continuing that negativity into the week. And how do I deal with this, Chana? How do I get out of this? And what I always try to share and what helped them was remembering that this is not the complete end all be all of your relationship. This is not all there is, that there's no possibility to move forward. This is a situation that's happening right now. This is an issue, or this is a pattern, or this is a hurt feelings, perhaps on both sides, that needs to be dealt with in this moment. And it's not the end all be all of your relationship. There is hope when you need to get to the other side, right? We need to cross the sea. We need to get to the other side of that issue, and there's more of your relationship to experience. It's just being able to understand, how do I deal with this issue? But when we're in the issue, it feels all encompassing and like we can't get out of it. But remembering that it's one piece, it's one aspect, and yes, hard and it's challenging. And that's why I'm so happy they reached out for help, and dealing with that challenge, so that, either finding the right words to say or the right perspective to take, or learning from it, so that you can, knowing how to deal with the negativity, so that then you can get to the other side of that issue and get on, so to speak, with the rest of your relationship. And one other thing that I just wanted to share, because I think I read it in the Haggadah, and I just thought it was so beautiful and so perfect for what we talk about here in Coffee and Connection, and absolutely feminine all the time. And that was an answer that I saw to, why do we do all these things? So that the children will ask. This has always been an issue in our house. Me and my husband, we've never been very happy with that answer. Why do we do this? So kids will ask. It doesn't feel like a really good answer, right? And the Rav Rimon in his Haggadah, a beautiful Haggadah, expresses that one of the reasons we do that is to get the kids asking questions. Because if the kids can ask questions on any little thing, why do we eat this and not that? Why are we dipping? Why are we leaning? Why do we, pour the cup now and not say anything? If we can get the kids to ask little questions, and it's safe for them to do that, and we answer their questions, and we pay attention to their questions, and we are so happy that they ask those questions, we're teaching our children that it's safe to ask the deeper questions. It's safe to think about and ask and feel comfortable asking questions. And this is such an important point, right? We've talked about this idea of, why do men not talk, and why do our children not share, and the importance of making it safe for children, for our husbands, for anyone, for even ourselves, to think and feel and express simple, mundane, silly, embarrassing, vulnerable, controversial topics. Because when people feel safe doing that, then they'll feel safe telling you everything, telling you more about their lives, being more open. And that is where connection happens, whether it's over a cup of coffee or over the phone or over a goodnight kiss or sitting on the couch and talking to your teens or on a date night with your husband or on a walk or just sitting and having a meal together. Real connection will happen when the the more mundane things, the more silly things, the safer things are talked about safely. Then the deeper things, the real things can come out as well. So I want to bless us all with just connection and happiness in our lives to move forward. I know that it's been busy weeks and you may have lots of new questions that you want to ask at this point because so much came up. Go ahead, send me an email with your questions and let's keep Coffee and Connection going. I'm excited to continue to connect with you over the summer. And until next time, may we all be blessed to live, love, and be loved with all our hearts. Goodbye for now.